Welcome everyone, welcome in our homes and welcome on this panel. I'm very excited to be joined by an esteemed group of professionals coming from different sectors, very different organizations operating in different regions, but all sharing a very common passion and commitment to green, healthy and smart buildings, which happens to be the topic of today's panel. My name is Roxana Isayu. I'm the Director of Real Estate at CREsp, the global benchmark for ESG in real estate and infrastructure sectors, covering 5.3 trillion in assets under management this year. But I would like to welcome Robert Wasselholm, the CEO of Trilogy Real Estate. Welcome, Robert. We have Stephanie Barr, the Vice President for Sustainability at Harrison Street Real Estate Partners. Basil Demorutus, I'm pretty sure I didn't pronounce that right. The managing partner, the managing partner for partnership. Welcome everyone. Please introduce yourselves in more detail. Tell us a bit about yourselves, your organizations, and a bit about what makes your strategy special with regards to healthy, resilient, green developments. Robert, I'll hand over to you.
Okay. Trilogy, I started 5 years ago with two main real estate investments, one in London and one in Manchester. They were both kind of failed, ugly, unloved assets, which is kind of what I like to do. And we have been repositioning them towards, I guess, the office occupier of the future, workplace of the future. And as we started thinking about it 5 years ago and trying to think about the mindset of the worker of the future, we concluded that actually sustainability and wellness would be absolutely a key part of what we needed to deliver. So we were doing it very much from an occupier's perspective. And interestingly, we debate whether we should be looking at it from an investor's perspective, but from our perspective, we try to think about what the occupier wants first. That's our obsession. And then see what happens after that. That's what we do.
Well, and I would say that is very obvious for anyone that does a quick check of your website and quickly runs through the main pages on vision and portfolio and strategy that comes across very clearly from the way that you present and you introduce the organization. And I'm sure everyone would love to hear more about it, but for now I would like to hand over to Stephanie to introduce herself.
Hi, thanks Roxana. Stephanie Barr from Harrison Street. We are an investment management firm focused exclusively on alternative real assets. We've invested about 34 billion into sectors like senior living and student housing, medical office, and we now invest in renewables and utility infrastructure. And we've always been focused on a certain level of health and wellness due to the tenants that we serve. We care for seniors, we care for students, and so there's a lot of things that we've always done to care for those tenants. And since I guess we started with CREsp in 2013 or so, we've really expanded our program, focusing on really what is most material to our asset classes. And we do that across the US and funds in Europe. And so my role, I focus a lot on how can we enhance our existing business processes, our investment management, decision-making processes to better understand these material issues and integrate them into what we're doing, and to collaborate very deeply with our partners. So we are investor, we have third parties or joint venture partners do operations and development. And so it's a very collaborative approach that we take, and we are all learning. And so sharing our lessons learned with our partners is a big part of our strategy.
Well, you definitely have a long experience in developing that health and wellness strategy due to the nature of your portfolio, then transferring those lessons learned to the other sectors. That in itself is an interesting perspective to approach here, because everyone's being forced right now to think of that right now. We would love to hear some of your thoughts, having done this for quite a number of years now with Harrison Street. Basil, welcome.
Thank you. Hi, yeah, Basil Demeridis, managing partner of For Partnership. I guess a bit like Robert, we set up our business about 8 years ago. Set it up out of a single family office. We're a real estate investor. That's all that we do. And we set it up with the intention from the beginning to integrate ESG values into our real estate strategy, based on the belief that this ultimately drives higher financial and economic returns, as well as driving positive change in the built environment and tackling some of the deeply entrenched social issues that we see across the communities in which we invest. We invest in Western Europe, so principally in the UK and Germany, although we have dabbled outside of that a little bit. We have a portfolio of about 1 million square feet of real estate across 12 assets. Those assets are principally offices, so about 2/3 of what we look at is traditional office refurbishment, redevelopment, and the remainder is mostly focused on the living sector, where we are currently drawn to co-living, micro-housing, and assisted living, elderly housing. I think just briefly in terms of our ESG strategy and our approach, and perhaps where it's a bit differentiated, is really that we take an integrated approach to the E and the S, and we don't really view them as two separate and distinct activities. When we go into a project, we look at how we can go and make improvements to the physical infrastructure of the building and simultaneously improve the carbon footprint and the social outcomes in the buildings themselves.
So you actually named your strategy. It's a proprietary strategy that's called Building Forward, right? That's very much centered around shaping communities and influencing the fabric of societies of the buildings. What does that mean for your operations? What does that mean for running the business on a day-to-day basis, and the kind of skills that you need to employ and the kind of people that you work with as external parties and as internal parties and so on? Because it sounds like you're really taking this bottom-up approach, but also top-down approach with everything that ESG is concerned.
Yeah, I think that's a nice way to frame it. And I always think between the top down and the bottoms up, that in some ways the exciting stuff happens at the interface of those two things. I think you're also equally right to touch on the I think artificial separation of church and state between developers and operators. You know, we develop and then we hand over it to operation, and I'm sure as both Robert and Stephanie will attest that I think that's a bit of a false dichotomy, and certainly as we develop our own buildings, we refurbish and retrofit them, but at the same time we do them with the mind that we're going to operate them. And on the rare occasion where we've sold something early, it's somehow a bit disappointing in a way that we haven't been able to fully realize our vision. So I don't think those two things are really separable, and we do need to operate it. We spend a lot of time thinking about our third parties. You asked about that. I think certainly during COVID and during lockdown, we've thought a lot about our relationships, and in some ways 2020 for us has been about shifting a lot of they probably won't like me saying it, but deadwood, and focusing on parties that kind of get our vision and that are on board with it, and looking to deepen those relationships and getting rid of the ones that are that don't understand exactly what we're all about. I think that's key for success, really. So
when you start your due diligence processes to look for partners as developers or operators, depending on which side you're on, how do you establish those minimum efficiency requirements and those minimum standards that you want them all to achieve? And have you ever excluded a potential partner from the race simply because of that? And this is as much a question to you as to everyone else, because I think you are all involved in these processes.
This is to Stephanie, is it? Or?
Well, to everyone, really.
Great.
Stephanie, if you want to kick off.
Yeah, I mean, I will say that to date, we haven't excluded anyone, because I think our vision is that we want to bring people along, that they're skilled and experts in a certain aspect of being a great operator, which is why we want to partner with them. And then we want to supplement their expertise with our lessons learned. But yeah, it has become more of a diligence aspect of when we look at new partners and when we look at new deals, we're definitely thinking about it very early on in that assessment, in the life cycle of an investment, maybe more so than maybe we were in the past. I think in the past we were looking at, well, we have this great new asset that we bought, and how can we make it better, and how can we teach our partner? Now we're thinking about it way more upfront.
I mean, it's from my perspective kind of interesting, and I think it would be really interesting to hear Basil's view on it. You mentioned that when you set off on your journey, that you were determined to kind of follow the ESG agenda. But what I often hear from investors is, yeah, that's okay. All right, Robert, that's what you want to do, but not at the expense of our returns, financial returns. And if you can come up with a strategy which actually delivers just as good, if not better, financial returns than a non-ESG strategy, then that's nirvana. And I wonder, Basil, is that something that you kind of have grappled with and finding what are the strategies that really do drive returns for investors?
Yeah, I think that's true. And again, I come out of a family office background. In fact, the name of our firm kind of unimaginatively was originally Family Office Real Estate, FORE. And I think we've now pivoted that a little bit to the future of real estate, which conveniently has the same acronym. But no, I think you're absolutely right. I think investors like ESG. It's for some, it varies from a kind of a tick box exercise to something that's more deeply embedded in their investment philosophy. But I think to a person, that very few of them that I've met want to sacrifice any kind of financial return. So I think that's essential. I think there's an enlightened subset of that group that really believes, like we do, that actually it's a long-term driver of value. And I think that's a shift that I think I'm encouraged to have seen more recently, where we're going from trying to like mitigate some sort of negative outcomes to actually using ESG as a tool to drive higher financial returns. And I think probably it's fair to say COVID has hastened that along a bit as well.
So are investors then, would you say that investors are starting to pay a premium for healthy and green and sustainable buildings? And by the way, I know this terminology is very loaded because it can mean a lot of things to many people. We see a lot of initiatives coming from the European Commission in Europe that are trying to standardize what green means and what sustainable investment means, less so in the US. But from your interaction so far with investors, what are the signals that you see? Do you see that that side of investors themselves are the ones that are pushing this very aggressively, or are you still looking at the regulators as being the more threatening parties at the moment? Threatening in a good way.
From my perspective, I think we're just at a pivot point. If I go back 5 years ago, I think it was more about investors avoiding buildings that clearly had a very bad rating, that because the regulations were going to say, if your sustainability rating's too low, then occupiers won't be allowed to occupy that property. So it was seen as a risk that you had to mitigate. I think that, Basil might have a different view now, but I'm yet to see investors saying, I would actually positively pay a premium price for a sustainable building. I think we're just getting to the stage where there's a few occupiers that might pay a premium price purely because they'll say, we won't occupy a building that doesn't meet certain credentials for us. So that's the pivot point I'm seeing. Basil, do you have a different view on that?
Yeah, I think you're right to focus on the occupiers, Robert, because I think it's probably coming from that side, if I might say. So I think occupiers are now prepared to pay a premium in terms of rent for buildings that fulfill some sort of what is perceived as perhaps more strategic as an initiative. So we've seen it in our own buildings around the corner from you in Manchester, Robert, at Windmill Green, where we're getting 34, 36 pounds a square foot against a grade A prime rent of 38. Now ours is a refurbished 1970s building that has more columns and a bit lower floor to ceiling, and it's always going to be a refurbishment, so not quite as great as a brand new, bright, shiny, tall grade A building. But we're within a hair's breadth of those rents, and I think you can only rent a building and sell a building once, unfortunately, so you don't really know for sure. But I think it's because it does embody some of those values that people are willing.
Some of the occupiers you lease space to, do they what types of occupiers would you say you're seeing that are positively embracing it?
I think it's a bit of a hackneyed thing to think it all comes from tech and media. Stephanie, you've got a much larger portfolio to deal with, so maybe you've got a better data set. But we've seen it across law, professional services, all kinds of different people, call centers, even, believe it or not. I mean,
where I've seen it is universities, education, universities a lot.
Yeah, that's what we're seeing specifically, and healthcare. And I think for us, like, we're a fiduciary, so if we're going to do an initiative at an asset, we really want to prove the value creation, and that's forced us to look at the actual correlation to valuation appraisals, and the actual impact to NOI, and we're really looking closely at that, and it's coming into these anecdotal ways. We've done a big water efficiency retrofit at an asset, which significantly reduced water expenses, which really helped the property valuation. And so you can start to tie it to that. And yes, that's just one project, and it's not maybe a health project, which is more qualitative and nuanced. But I think internally we're really working on our methodology to tie that story of, we've invested capital, we've done an improvement. Does it make tenants stickier? Does it attract more tenants? Are we seeing better occupancy over time? Are we seeing more interest upon disposition? We're really trying to start tracking that more methodically.
So speaking of sticky tenants or attractive sectors right now, obviously the last year has shifted that in many ways. And there's been this debate in between residential and office over the last months at least. Basil, you have both office and residential in your portfolio. I'm not sure if anybody else here has that mix at the moment.
Hospitality.
Medical office.
I have hospitality.
So everyone's been affected to a certain degree, but I wanted to ask Basil, as somebody that has to care for both residential and office, because everywhere I go right now, and every article I read is basically about the fighting between residential and office, and one of these sectors trying to capture more of the market going forward or not. How has COVID and the last months affected your investment strategy, if at all, and your development strategy?
I was wondering how, I'm impressed we've gotten this far without an implied question about, is the office dead?
You knew it was going to happen.
I knew it was coming. But yeah, not a day goes by, maybe not an hour goes by where that question's not raised. I mean, look, I think office space has a purpose, and we've been asking since 8 years, every meeting with every investor and every tenant, why do you go to an office? You have an office in your pocket. So what is it that's emotional connection, or that urgency that causes you to go through this ritual every morning, which is awful? You have to get up early, you go under the tube, it smells, it's hot, it's stinky, you travel for an hour, you get a terrible sandwich at the end of it. Like, there must be something. It's like a pot of gold. Like, what is it at the end of that journey every day that is compelling you to go to the office? And I think there not enough people have really been answering that question. And I think, sadly, in some ways, COVID has actually pushed us in the opposite wrong direction, because what office owners and companies are doing now is they're really trying to answer the question with a solution, which is essentially that good news, the office isn't going to kill you. We're going to wash our hands. We're going to wear masks. And here's all the things that we're going to do, like, so that you don't die when you come to work. I mean, can you imagine a product, any product, being like that's their main selling point? Come buy, Mars chocolate bars because it won't kill you. I don't think that's the way to sell something. So I think we need to turn it around and get past that and start advocating for office. And because office is a special place where special things can happen. So again, open-ended question, what is it that can only happen in the office? Part of it is around technology and kind of how tech in a building can help empower creativity and foster innovation and make people feel more fulfilled and achieve that sort of top of the pyramid of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. But there has to be a different question that we're asking ourselves, rather than like how do we properly advocate for the office in a genuine and authentic sense?
And it's not a new question, because over the last years, I think the real estate industry as a whole has been trying to make that transition from risk management to value creation when it comes to healthy, innovative, inspiring spaces, no matter what sector we are talking about. And that's also been visible or reflected through the emergence of health and well-being specific building certifications like WELL and FitWell. And I think, Neighbors has a special module for that as well. So I wanted to ask, what is your perspective on that? Do you use building certifications? Do you certify buildings on the specific topics? Robert.
So we had WellScore come around 5 years ago, and the £50,000 I was going to be charged to have a WellScore certificate, I concluded I was better off spending that money on putting in my own wellness staircase. Let's encourage people to walk up 2 flights of stairs rather than taking the lifts if they don't need to. That paid for a staircase. And then actually, rather than needing a certificate, come and see the property. And we've absolutely embraced it. We've got waterside working, we have waterside pavilions, biodiversity. We thought really hard about what inspires light bulb moments. What is it? What's the thing that will inspire creativity, particularly when everybody's jobs is going to be taken over by artificial intelligence, and we're all going to, unless we're into creativity, we're going to have nothing to do. So we thought about it, and how can we create a really inspiring place? And it's nice to have a well score, but I'd rather people come and see our place and talk to our occupiers and ask them what they think about the community we've created, and hear it from the horse's mouth. And we put money into, a lot more money than we used to, into curating community kind of events. We have an events manager, we have a wellness manager, we have got a daily program of things going on. Now during lockdown, everything's online. So everybody's trying to work out how can we deal with people's mental wellness issues. And particularly in East London, we found ourselves attracting lots of universities, and they're really struggling with this. These students they're having to learn entirely offline, and that's not entirely the way to best learn. You need to learn by meeting other students, talking about things, riffing with your tutors. And so we're trying to create environments where people can come together. We have them outdoors, we have pavilions, we have tents, we'll have outdoor parties. And that's where I am on the whole well score thing. Let's live it rather than just needing a certificate.
I will say, from our perspective, I feel very similar about building certifications, in that it's not always worth the piece of paper, though sometimes it is. I think it depends on the market. And we are finding, though, in this environment, and we actually started working with Fitwell a year and a half, 2 years ago, because we liked it a bit more than well, but and it fits our sectors better. And we've actually developed specific scorecards for senior living and student housing through Fitwell. And what we like in this current environment is having a third-party stamp to say that our viral safety procedures are in line with the CDC or whatever standard. And And that's really how we're pushing it down. And it's also for us an educational tool for our operators that we could say, here, this is a standard we really hope we want you to follow in terms of viral safety and also health and wellness programming and cleaning practices. And so it's an educational tool and an engagement tool for us there.
Throw one out quickly. So we're in the process of becoming a certified BCorp. So some of you may be familiar with that. It's a kind of a certification or doctrine that you embed into your own business in your corporate governance documents, which encourages you to act on behalf of all stakeholders, not just for the financial shareholders of the business. And so we find that a really good framework, and going through that certification journey has really helped us fine tune our commitments to all of the stakeholders that we deal with.
I was going to ask you, Basil, because it really excited me to see that you define yourself as a purpose-driven real estate investment firm, which is not something you see very often if you go to a real estate company's website. So I'm very excited to hear you're in the process of becoming a B Corp. What does that mean for you? And as a purpose-driven real estate organization in today's environment, has your definition of resilience on an organizational level and on a development level changed over the last year?
Yeah, look, I think we talk about it in the abstract, resilience in the abstract, don't we, all the time? And we've all have disaster recovery plans, and we talk about helping communities and help people find jobs and meaningful employment and upskilling and so forth. But it's really been tested in a real practical sense, hasn't it, over the last 6 to 12 months? Everything from our own organization, as you say, how do we deal with our own people first and foremost, to the communities and tenants that we serve. I definitely think that we've leaned into that strategy a lot, and I've had people on my team volunteering in local community centers, in the council flats and social housing around where they live, volunteering for the NHS. We opened up one of our co-living buildings that went to a very low vacancy. We gave away all of the flats in there to NHS key workers to help out. So I think it puts some of these things that we tend to write on paper and that become part of these certifications that Stephanie talked about. And we actually now have put them to the test to actually see what they mean in practice. And I think that's been really fulfilling for all of us on the team here to actually see.
That's I like that all-encompassing definition, and I will link it to Stephanie. One of your main ESG pillars is resilience and risk management, and I know you're defining resilience from the perspective of physical transition risks, but also through that social component. And I wanted to ask you, when you think of the built environment in 30, 35 years, what do you think the way of thinking of new developments will be then? And how is that different than it is right now? And how are you preparing for that?
Yeah, I mean, I think when it comes to thinking about the next 30 years, you think about the physical risk of climate change and where are we building and how are we building and how are we thinking about the resiliency of that specific physical asset? And then to think about the social risk of how is our society going to change over the next 30 to 50 years and how are our sectors going to change? Are we going to evolve? How we think about student housing, how we think about senior living. And another pillar, or the tagline, I guess, or mission as an organization is making an impact. And so how can we make an impact on the demographics, the pieces of society that we intersect with? That's a big question for us. I mean, we're exploring that. I think it's very clear on the physical side. We need to integrate climate science. We need to identify the risks, ratings, and we need to talk to our insurance consultants to understand mitigation and long-term planning of maybe areas that we want to maybe not invest in over the next few decades. So that's very clear. The social risk and resiliency is less clear. How can you plan for civil unrest and protests, and how can you build resiliency to that? that's definitely something I want to continue to explore.
In a London sense, one of the things that we have a small problem in London, if sea levels are going to rise, London's quite low, and there's a lot of people paying big money for assets that are sitting right in the middle of what is a floodplain, and we're beginning to think more about that on our investment committee. Should we be actually taking this quite seriously now? Thinking ahead and actually looking at how much height we've got.
I think the answer is yes, you should.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. But it's amazing seeing prices people are paying for these assets, heart of the West End, heart of the city. And I don't think anybody's investment committee really takes seriously flood risk.
Well, I'm sure they will very soon. And it's not only the physical risks, but also the transition risks. And related to this, we've been part of a consortium funded by the European Union, Horizon 2020 project, that developed a set of decarbonization pathways for commercial and residential sectors in Europe. Starting with Europe, but also we've now expanded the scope to the US and Canada and Australia and a few countries in Asia. And it's you've probably heard of CREM, the Carbon Risk Real Estate Monitor. It's a tool that's heavily used now and endorsed by institutional investors, and something that will be used more and more. So it's publicly available. The information is online, but we are also helping organizations that already report to GRESS map out their assets on these decarbonization pathways, and basically get a feel of how many of the assets are at risk of being stranded in alignment with the Paris Climate Change Agreement. Mm-hmm. I am wary of time because time flies, and there's many things we could talk about. But if you were to do a quick retrospective of the last year and think of your work and your organization's focus over the next year and perhaps the next 3 years, what would you say are the most important important strategies for the near future, and the key takeaways for you from the last year, and how do those connect? It's an easy question.
Yeah. How much time do you say we have left? I mean, I might have a go. I mean, I think one of the key things I think we've been thinking about and we've learned is around technology. I mean, we're all now connecting with Zoom and everything else, and I think we're a little bit cautious on kind of the over relying on technology. I think technology and real estate are going like this, and of course you see people like Fifth Wall who are championing this, an amazing organization doing some incredible work to bring together technology and real estate, and we're firm believers. But I just would like to put a little asterisk at the end of that sentence that let's just be a little bit careful of over relying on technology and the wrong kinds of technology, because let's face it, we've had things like Facebook and Instagram and Twitter for the last decade, 15 years, and I think that's an open question for history to decide whether those have improved connectivity between us and social cohesion, or whether that's torn it apart. And I don't want to, kind of be too negative on technology, because I do think it has a role to play and a place to play in all of our lives, and not least of all the modern workspace. But I just want to caveat that it's not without its risks. And I think where we've felt like technology is maybe being underexplored is around building science and building materials. So you talk about the low carbon transition and stranded assets. There are plenty of these hard to abate sectors like steel and concrete that are a lot less sexy than an app you put on your phone, but I might argue are going to rise in importance in all of our lives as we think about what buildings in the next 30, 40, 50 years look like.
And since you brought up materials, and since this is a panel focused on the developer's perspective, I also want to bring up, the issue of life cycle assessments and the measurement of embodied carbon, which is let's be honest, something that ultimately will have to be done across the board, but it's if there's any sector where that's easier done is with the developers and the development phase. It's much more difficult to start calculating the embodied carbon of a fully operational buildings. So I wanted to also ask all of you, is this something that is on your radar? I know there are the methodologies of doing life cycle assessments, for example, are not completely fleshed out, and there's no general consensus of here's the perfect formula and apply it, and then it's just very easy to do. But it's more open-end question.
I've found myself right in the crosshairs of it because I rather pride myself on taking buildings and finding ways of repositioning them rather than knocking them over and redeveloping them. And with the rise of technology, one of the things that we've been working on for the last 3 years is whether we can create a sustainable data center. And particularly, we've been looking at whether we can repurpose buildings for data centers. And one problem is that all the M&E guys say we need 7-meter floor-to-ceiling heights, and there aren't many office buildings that need 7-meter floor-to-ceiling heights. We're interested in new technologies, which are immersive technologies that are coming in that are perhaps reducing the height that people need. But your point about life cycle, you know, I said to our engineers the other day, okay, come on, let's use this technology to retain this building and it'll be much better. And they said, no, you've got to remember, they've got to look at the life cycle and the amount of money we're saving by not demolishing the building and creating the most efficient data center that could be with the layout exactly right for the racks is dwarfed by the efficiency we can create by creating the perfect data center that is, you know. So I was approaching it from a real estate perspective, and the engineers kind of out-trumped me and said, no, we're much better off getting the engineering right, because that's where the real carbon problems are going to be created if we can't get that really efficient. So,
but is there an opportunity for some material recovery in that process, for example?
For the recovery, yeah, I mean, we're absolutely in the heart of, we're next to one of the biggest regeneration schemes in East London, the Blackwall Reach Regeneration Scheme. They're our neighbors, and they have put in a district heating loop, and they've got no heat. So we're saying, hey, we'll be here. We've got heat. We can give it to you. We're also thinking about putting a triathlon swimming pool in so that we will have our own way of recycling the heat. And we're also looking at vertical farming as part of another interesting part of the debate for us. All the different ways we can reuse the heat and recycle. We're also next to the most horrendous polluting road, the Blackwall Tunnel, which has got queues of belching diesel fumes. So I'm saying to the guys who are producing the data center, can we actually make the data center do two things? Can we suck in the carbon from the Blackwall Reach Tunnel and become an air purifier? So as we go through cleaning cooling all of our things, can we suck in the carbon one end and puff out purified oxygenated air at the other side? So we're looking at all those things. And of course, solar panels, wind, how can we tap into the Thames Array? It's good fun. We're trying to sort of really work out how we can create what we would regard as the most sustainable data center in the world, if not Europe.
Well, you're definitely delivering on your promise for more environmentally friendly and healthier buildings. Stephanie, your last remarks and maybe your perspective on this.
Yeah, I mean, I think embodied carbon is interesting and exciting, and I think I'd love to see a circular economy methodology really take hold of the building materials industry. I don't think it's our key focus right now, in that what I want to do is reduce the carbon emitted from electric use and gas use on site, and decarbonize our grid. And I feel like that's what is the material boundary that my firm sits in, and where we can make the most influence. So yeah, focusing on energy efficiency first in what we build, thinking about electrification, probably not with retrofits, but electric buildings in the future, really looking at on-site solar wherever it makes sense. And our infrastructure fund is, of course, doing some great things in the utility space to decarbonize grids. So I think understanding where each of us sit in the market and what our skill set is and where we can make the most influence is is key. And I try to like let myself off the hook if I can't do all the great things like life cycle of materials.
It sounds like you all have very ambitious and very busy agendas ahead of you, and you've all embarked on very ambitious journeys. Good luck with all of that. Keep us posted, and I would like to thank you very much for joining me in today's conversation.